Well, hello again everybody, and welcome to episode 7, I think it is, of Encounters with Australian Birds, my short video series I've been working on these last few weeks. Today we're going to have a look at the emu, just about my favourite bird in Australia in many ways, and one I never cease to marvel at whenever I see it out in the wild, and that's quite often. Emus are very widespread in Australia, and when you're travelling interstate in the car, quite often you'll see them in the paddocks, and if you're out travelling in the bush, sometimes you'll come across in a spot that you'll see in some of these video clips, a spot that I go to quite often called Lake Merity near Renmark in South Australia. You can almost be guaranteed at different times of the year to see an adult with young ones in tow running across the car in front of you. Emus are really curious animals. They will probably run sometimes when they first see you, but if you are stationary in a car or something like that and you wave something out of the window like a red jersey or yellow jersey or something or other, they're very curious and they'll come right up to you. And I'll show you some photos where we actually did that one day. So that's what we're going to do today, look at the emu. It's Australia's largest land bird, tallest height-wise. The cassowary, which is up in the north in Queensland, comes close. It's a heavier bird, but not quite as tall, almost as tall as the emu. And the two biggest animals on the continent of Australia are the kangaroo, of course, and the emu, who are they're on the coat of arms for Australia, and they're a wonderful bird. Before I start showing you some stuff, this is a book that I got some time back, called A Separate Creation by Graham Pizzey, who is a popular photographer and author on Australian wildlife, and it's called A Separate Creation. And I'll just read a little bit out of the cover of this. The wilderness areas of the world are today shrunk to a few inaccessible pockets. But less than 200 years ago, a beautiful continent lay entire, untouched by modern man. The awe and excitement of European explorers, botanists and naturalists, as they unveiled the mysteries and wonders of Terra Australis Incognita, are captured in A Separate Creation. This was a phrase. A separate creation was coined by someone a while ago, saying everything was so different here that it must have been separate to the rest of creation. And here's a little bit of a quote from Charles Darwin, of all people. A little time before this, I had been lying on a sunny bank and was reflecting on the strange character of the animals of this country as compared with the rest of the world. An unbeliever in everything beyond his own reason might exclaim, two distinct creators must have been at work. Their object, however, has been the same, and certainly the end in each case is complete. Just one little thing I picked up from this book, and I recommend if you can try and get it somewhere. It's a wonderful book with comments by all the early explorers and botanists that first settled in Australia about the animals and birds that they encountered. The word emu is an unusual word. Where does it come from? And excuse me, it says here in this book, the word emma, or emu, E-M-E-U, came with the first fleet that came to Australia and settled in Australia. As What Content, who's writing this particular extract, suggests, although he was apparently in several minds about using the name, variously calling the bird ostrich or cassowary. There was, as usual in the naming of Australian animals, a good deal of imprecision. Ema, E-M-A, is Portuguese for crane, and the name had been quite incorrectly applied to South Australia's flightless equivalent to the emu, the common rhea. The rhea and the emu are probably distantly related and are certainly superficially similar, being somewhat the same size, greyish-brown, flightless and fleet-footed. So the adoption of the name for the Australian bird was logical. There you go. They used the word that was being used originally for the rhea in South America, which looks very similar to the emu but a bit smaller, to call our bird the emu. See if you can get hold of that book. Some wonderful reading and some lovely photography in that as well. So I've been importing some stuff into my computer today to find all the right sort of footage. So you'll see a combination of stills and movies. Once again, not David Attenborough quality, but just to give you a glimpse of my encounters with Australian birds, and encounters that are open to all of us when we're out on holidays, travelling around and just having a camera or a movie camera with us and keeping our eyes and ears open. So sit back and enjoy the Australian emu. Thanks once again for watching.
Settle down there.
The one place that I really can always be guaranteed of seeing emus is Lake Merity near Renmark, about half an hour's drive out of Renmark in South Australia. It's a place I've been coming to for many years, which my late father-in-law first introduced me to. This is showing the lake with a high river there. The water is not usually up quite that high. A lot of water in it. A fantastic haven for wildlife, part of the Ramsar wetlands. It's a sanctuary these days. Of course, when you come along in an area like this, it's not only bird life you'll see and emus, but you'll quite often see kangaroos as well. And I think we're coming up to one just now to see and have a look. But there you are, lots of fish in days gone by, lots of freshwater mussels that Aboriginal people used to eat. And here we are, here's a kangaroo hiding amongst the grass, a big red one. And there are other animals in Australia besides the emu and the kangaroo that are quite big. We'll talk about them in a minute. So here we are, we're travelling out on the back blocks around the outskirts of Lake Merity. Windmill Bend is a popular spot there. I just heard this weekend that the actual windmill that you'll see in a minute has actually blown down, which is a bit sad. It's been there for many years and they're not going to repair it. Hopefully someone might. It's a bit of a local icon. We're not always, you find surprises out here. There's a little bush toilet out here, and look at this, swallows nesting in the toilet because hardly anyone's ever there. Baby swallows, fantastic. And I've been back twice to this place and there's been swallows on each occasion in there. So here we are, cruising along on the outskirts of Lake Merity. There's a windmill I was talking about before. Unfortunately, it's now no longer upright and working like that. But this is the country you're travelling through when you will see kangaroos bound across in front of you and emus too. You drive along and look with quite excited anticipation because usually you will see them. And usually adults, the males bring up baby emus, adults with some young ones in tow. So just keep your eyes and ears open your eyes peeled, because I'm sure we'll see one in a minute. And there you have it. Adult with some babies running across in front of us. A beautiful sight. And this is a common occurrence when the emus have been breeding, and you'll see them different sizes. Here's some more with some bigger ones. Ducks in the foreground. Sometimes, if you keep your eyes open, you will see emus walking around the edge of a lake and having a drink, just like in this situation here. Now for a change of pace, you can see emus. This is up on Bindara Station in New South Wales on the Darling River. Emus on the run, disturbed by the vehicle that we were in, and they run to start with, but then gradually they slow down. And you can see from some of these shots just how quickly they can move. They're slowing down now though as we look at them.
Remember that time up at wherever you were with your father there? Almost looked in the car.
Yeah. Well, one did there. He didn't come on in.
While I might have said earlier that the emu and the kangaroo are the two largest land animals we have in Australia, that means native animals. But we have lots of introduced species that are roaming the outback, like these camels. In some places there are ostriches. You'll have wild brumbies or horses, and wild donkeys. And of course up north we have the crocodiles, which are very heavy but not tall, of course. And we have the cassowaries, which are almost as big as the emu. Now we go back in the vicinity of Bindara Station in New South Wales. This is my late father-in-law walking across an area which is called Log Hut, and it's where my grandfather grew up on this property out there. And I was watching these cows here at this little water hole there, and lo and behold, I saw something moving down through the trees. Just have a look at what's coming through the trees there. And I spent many, well, a good 20 minutes, I suppose, just watching what was unfolding before my eyes. Emus. It was quite a warm day, lots of insects around. It was very still, and they're coming down to have a drink. You'll see some of them will dip their heads right down from the standing position, and the other one there is just coming down and resting on his elbows, different ways that the emus get a drink. One of the things about birds drinking, about the only birds in Australia and around the world that actually drink by sucking the water up, pigeons and doves. I think there are some finches that do that in Australia as well. But basically most birds, when they drink, they don't suck the water up. They have to gather the water into their beak, then throw their head back and swallow it down. So you see them, they've got to lift their head up each time when they have a drink. But I was fascinated by these. I just sat there for some time, and probably I might give you a little bit too much footage here, but it was just a beautiful time. You know, you think back on these things and say that was just a magic moment, watching these wild emus come down to the water hole. I was distracted by the cows decided to move out, the cattle decided to move out, but then the emus were still there. I mentioned the cassowary before. The cassowary is not as tall as the emu, but pound for pound a lot heavier. And both these birds, of course, can be quite dangerous. The cassowary and the emus, if cornered, they can actually do you some nasty injuries, and some people have been killed by a cassowary and some people have been killed by an emu, I think. Not very often, but you've got to be careful when you're around these birds, because generally speaking they're quite docile, but if they're cornered, they can attack man and also animals like cattle dogs and things like that. Just beautiful creatures. This is another fascinating encounter I had with emus. I saw them moving in amongst these grapevines. Look how well camouflaged they are. You wouldn't know unless you'd seen them go in there that there were emus in there, unless you had a pretty sharp eye for detail. Then they moved out of the grapevines into a neighbouring olive orchard, and they all moved in. There's a whole lot of them, and I stalked up. I took a lot of still photos, which I've got somewhere, of in the grapevines and in the olive orchard, but I got fairly close to them. I was just using my little movie camera, and they were oblivious to me, but after a while, when I got closer and closer, they became aware that something was up, that someone was there watching them, and they just milled around in the inner sanctum of the olive grove. You see them looking there, they're just trying to work out what's going on. Emus are very curious animals, and they will come up to you if they are, if you sit in a stationary car, for instance, and maybe you're waving a coloured pullover outside the car window, they will come up quite close. I'll show you some images afterwards of some of that, where I've taken some still images where emus have come across and been attracted because they're so curious. But here they are, they're all milling around in there. I got within just a few feet of them really at one stage, and it was quite an interesting encounter, getting up close and personal with these wild birds. Emus are often kept in zoos and enclosures on private properties, and given a few acres to wander around in, they can be kept quite well in captivity. Some baby ones here with adults. They look beautiful with their stripes, these little babies. But watching these here, this is on Kangaroo Island, watching these here, we soon realised that one of them had a little bit of a problem. And I don't know what became of him eventually. I have shown this little bit of footage of this young bird with the gummy leg on my YouTube channel in other places, but this is a bit more of a recording of him and his siblings and adult as they're just walking around in this enclosure on Kangaroo Island. Here's our little fellow with the broken leg, or the malformed leg, and you would imagine that he would probably have a lot of trouble existing in the wild with a disability like that. Here are some more emus in another enclosure, a larger enclosure in Central Australia, and these are obviously being quite well fed, and it's feeding time, late afternoon. Lots of other birds there. There's some crows, there's some crested pigeons, Murray magpies. Not sure that there's much else there, but they're having a good feed there. And of course, when you're in the outback, the other clown that's around the place, that's not too far away from emus any time, is the galah. And the galahs frequent the outback and most of Australia really. They're all over the place. The clown prince of bird life in the outback and in the suburbs as well. So you'll see some galahs here in a moment. You can hear them in the background. Beautiful. Look at the tails going up. That's so funny. Now, remember I was saying how you can attract emus to your car from a distance, where if you just sit there stationary and you wave something out of the car window. They're very curious creatures. These birds came from that hill you can see in the distant background. We were parked by the side of the road, we could see them, and they gradually came closer and closer and closer until I was able to take some shots of them framed in the car window, and they come almost up to the car window, and then they eventually moved across in front of us. But they are very curious, these birds, and they can become quite tame. I'll just let you watch these as they get closer and closer to the car, and then finish off with a few other shots of some very tame wild emus. So now we're going to see a couple of pictures. There's my sister-in-law talking with her late grandfather, talking with a wild emu out in the bush. This one here was at Curtin Springs in Central Australia, and he's checking out the morning menu for the little restaurant, the outdoor restaurant they've got there, waiting for the cook to write it up. And here we have a few closing shots of some emus, once again in the outback. A beautiful bird. Thanks very much for watching.